James thought he had the perfect marriage until a chance discovery unraveled a web of lies and betrayal. His wife Diane's hidden affair leaves him devastated, but instead of succumbing to grief, James plots a calculated revenge to reclaim his life and dignity. As secrets come to light, Diane's world begins to crumble, but the fallout impacts their teenage daughter Sonia in ways James never anticipated. Just as James starts to rebuild, a series of tragic events turn his pursuit of justice into a harrowing journey of loss and heartbreak. A gripping tale of love, betrayal, and the unexpected consequences of vengeance. The morning started like any other. I had coffee brewing, my playlist of old rock classics echoing through the garage, and a goal in mind: make space for the new lawnmower Diane had been pestering me about for weeks. It was one of those mundane chores that filled a Saturday. Little did I know, this particular Saturday would mark the beginning of the end. I had been married to Diane for over a decade. She was vivacious and organized to a fault, always on the move, always busy. She had a daughter, Sonia, who was a teenager now and lived with us full-time. I'd taken pride in stepping up as a father figure, even if the role wasn't always easy. Together, we were a team, or at least, that's what I believed. The garage was a mess of forgotten belongings. Dust-covered boxes lined the shelves, remnants of our lives in disarray. One box caught my attention, an old suitcase that didn't seem familiar. Thinking it might contain winter clothes or items worth donating, I unzipped it. What I found inside didn't match either expectation. Souvenirs spilled out, keychains, postcards, little trinkets from places Diane had never mentioned visiting. A gnawing sense of unease settled in my chest. I stared at the items, my mind racing to place them in our shared history. She traveled frequently for work, often jetting off to conferences in distant cities. But these weren't the kinds of mementos she usually brought back. These were personal, too personal. I hesitated for a long moment before closing the suitcase. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation, I told myself. Still, doubt had crept in, an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. I tried to focus on cleaning the garage, but my thoughts were a whirlwind. Diane would be back in a few hours. Should I ask her about it? Would she get defensive? Or worse, would she brush it off? That evening, as we sat at dinner, I couldn't bring myself to bring it up. Diane was in high spirits, laughing with Sonia about some TikTok trend. She looked carefree, her blonde hair catching the light as she animatedly told a story. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the questions now circling in my head. Over the next few days, I tried to put the discovery out of my mind. But the suitcase lingered like a phantom. I started paying closer attention to Diane, her phone habits, her travel stories, the way she spoke about her work trips. It was subtle at first, the way she would lock her phone screen when I entered the room, or how she grew vague when I asked about her itinerary. Then, one night, the tipping point arrived. Diane had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion after a long day. I was finishing up some work on my laptop when her phone buzzed on the dresser. I wasn't the snooping type, but something compelled me to glance at the screen. The message was innocuous at first glance, just a notification from a contact saved as J. But the preview text froze me in place: "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow, beautiful." My chest tightened as I stared at the glowing screen. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I had to know more. Carefully, I picked up the phone and unlocked it using her passcode, a combination I'd known for years but never thought I'd need for something like this. What I found sent my heart plummeting. The message history between Diane and Jay, whose full name I quickly deduced was Jeremy, was filled with flirtation, inside jokes, and details of their next meeting. My hands trembled as I scrolled through months of conversations. This wasn't a recent fling, this was a long-standing affair. I confronted her the next morning. I didn't yell or rage. Instead, I held up her phone with Jeremy's messages displayed on the screen. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Diane's reaction was immediate. She grabbed the phone, her face flushing as she stammered for an explanation. "It's not what you think, James," she said, her voice trembling. "He's just a friend." "Friends don't say things like that," I shot back. "How long has this been going on?" She froze, her gaze darting to the floor. "A few months," she admitted quietly. "It's nothing serious. I swear." Her words felt like knives. Months? How many times had she looked me in the eyes during those months, told me she loved me, kissed me goodbye on her way to meet him? I couldn't hold back the flood of anger. "You've been lying to me," I said. To my face. "And you expect me to believe it's nothing serious?" Her defenses crumbled, and the excuses began pouring out. She felt neglected, she was lonely, she didn't know how to tell me she wasn't happy. The classic cheater's script. I listened in silence, my mind racing with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "I want to fix this," she said finally, her eyes pleading. "I love you, James. Please, let's work through this." But all I could see was the betrayal, the months of deceit, the lies woven into the fabric of our lives. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. Still, for the sake of Sonia and the life we'd built, I agreed to try, at least for now. What I didn't tell Diane was that I had my own plans in motion. Because trust, once shattered, is not easily rebuilt. And I wasn't the kind of man to let betrayal go unanswered. The days following my confrontation with Diane were surreal. On the surface, life continued as usual. We went through the motions of work, family dinners, and evening routines, but the air between us was heavy with unspoken tension. Every time I looked at her, I saw the messages, the betrayal, and the months of deception she had hidden so well. I needed clarity. Diane's admission of a few months didn't sit right with me, especially after seeing the ease and familiarity in her messages with Jeremy. So, I decided to dig deeper. One night, while Diane and Sonia were out shopping, I opened Diane's laptop. We had always been open with each other's devices, at least, I thought we had been. Her email was logged in, and I began searching. At first, there was nothing unusual: work emails, forwarded newsletters, messages from friends. But then I stumbled upon a folder named Receipts. The first few files were mundane: restaurant bills, online purchases. But then one caught my eye: a receipt from a boutique hotel in Orlando. The date was 3 months ago, during one of Diane's supposed work trips. The recipient's name was Jeremy Taylor. My stomach churned as I opened more files: tickets for events in the same city, car rentals, and photos of them together, smiling in places I'd never been. The timeline stretched far longer than Diane had admitted. This wasn't a fleeting mistake, this was a calculated, ongoing affair. When Diane returned home, she acted like nothing had happened, as though the confrontation never occurred. She even tried to initiate conversation, talking about how she wanted to plan a family trip. I could hardly stand to look at her, but I forced myself to play along. The key to my plan was patience. I didn't confront her again, not yet. Instead, I began to quietly secure my position. I reached out to a divorce attorney, laying out what I had found. The attorney, a sharp woman named Angela, listened intently. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and nodded. "You've got a strong case," Angela said. "Especially with the evidence you've collected. Have you considered what you want out of this?" I hesitated. What did I want? Diane had destroyed the foundation of our marriage, and while part of me wanted to see her pay, another part of me grieved for the life we'd built. "I want to protect what's mine," I said finally. "The house, custody of Sonia. And I want to make sure Diane can't pull the rug out from under me." Angela smiled, a cold, professional smile. "We can make that happen." Over the next week, I followed her advice meticulously. I transferred money from our joint accounts into one solely in my name, ensuring Diane wouldn't have access to the funds. I gathered more evidence, every message, every receipt, every clue I could find. And I waited. In the meantime, I kept up appearances. I played the role of the forgiving husband, nodding along as Diane promised to do better, to make amends. She even suggested marriage counseling, a laughable gesture considering the depths of her betrayal. I agreed, if only to buy time. My patience was rewarded when, a few days later, Diane slipped up. She was texting on her phone, her face alight with the kind of smile she used to reserve for me. When she set the phone down and left the room, I picked it up, unlocking it quickly. The message thread with Jeremy was still open. "I can't wait to see you this weekend," he had written. "We'll make up for lost time." Her reply was sickeningly casual, "Me too. It'll be perfect." The weekend was 2 days away. Diane had told me she was going on another work trip. My rage threatened to boil over, but I kept my composure. This was the opening I needed to finalize my plan. That Friday morning, Diane left early, kissing me on the cheek as though nothing was amiss. "I'll call you when I get to the hotel," she said with a smile. "Love you." I nodded, watching her drive away. As soon as she was out of sight, I sprang into action. With Angela's help, I had already prepared the divorce papers. Now, it was time to deliver the final blow. I called Diane's sister, Emma, who had always been close to me. "I need your help," I told her, explaining the situation. Emma was shocked but supportive. She agreed to take Sonia for the weekend, keeping her distracted while I put the pieces in place. That evening, I packed Diane's belongings into suitcases and left them by the door. I changed the locks on the house and called a locksmith to reinforce the security system. It wasn't just about reclaiming my home, it was about sending a message. When Diane called later that night, her voice was light, carefree. "Just got to the hotel," she said. "Long day. How are you?" "Fine," I replied evenly. "Everything's fine." By the time she returned on Sunday evening, the stage was set. As she pulled into the driveway, she noticed her belongings waiting for her. Her confusion turned to alarm when she tried the door and found it locked. I stepped outside, holding the divorce papers. Her face fell as she realized what was happening. "James, what is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This," I said, handing her the papers, "is the end of your lies." She started to protest, to plead, but I cut her off. "Save it, Diane. I know everything. Jeremy, the trips, the receipts. You betrayed me, and I won't tolerate it anymore." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "James, please," she whispered. "I can explain." "No," I said firmly. "You had months to come clean, and you chose to keep lying. Now you can deal with the consequences." As she stood there, clutching the papers, I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Diane's betrayal had shattered my trust, but it had also awakened something I had forgotten, a determination to protect what mattered most. And this was only the beginning. Diane's betrayal had marked the end of one chapter of my life, but the days that followed were the beginning of something entirely new. I knew it wouldn't be easy, divorce never is, but the clarity I felt after confronting her was unlike anything I'd experienced in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't living in a fog of suspicion and doubt. I was in control. The morning after Diane found her things on the driveway, she called me relentlessly. At first, I ignored her, letting the phone ring until it stopped. By the fifth call, I answered. "James," she began, her voice cracking. "Please, can we talk? You can't just throw me out like this." "Actually, I can," I said coldly. "Your name isn't on the title of the house, Diane. You gave up that right when you decided to spend your work trips with Jeremy. She started sobbing, but I didn't let her tears sway me. For years, I'd trusted her implicitly, never questioning her stories or her motives. Now, I realized how blind I'd been. You made your choices, Diane. Now you get to live with them. After I hung up, I called Angela to update her. She assured me everything was progressing as planned. The divorce papers were served, and Diane had no legal ground to contest my claim to the house. Angela had been thorough, and her expertise was invaluable. Diane's pleas shifted from desperate to manipulative over the next few days. She sent me long text messages about how much she loved me, how she had made a mistake, and how we could work through it for Sonia's sake. I didn't reply. Then, her tone turned accusatory. "You're no saint, James. You've worked long hours, ignored me, and now you're acting like the victim." I wanted to fire back, to tell her that working long hours was the only reason we lived comfortably. But Angela had advised me to keep my responses neutral, or better yet, non-existent. "Don't let her bait you," Angela had said. "Stick to the facts." Despite the chaos, I focused on keeping life stable for Sonia. She was caught in the middle, a casualty of Diane's selfish choices. Diane had called her, of course, spinning her version of the story. I sat Sonia down one evening to explain the situation as delicately as I could. "Sonia," I began, "I want you to know that none of this is your fault. Your mom and I have some issues to work through, and we've decided it's best to separate." She looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Is it because of me? Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "You didn't do anything wrong. This is about your mom and me. We both love you very much." She nodded, sniffling. "I don't want things to change." "I know," I said softly. "But I promise I'll do everything I can to make this easier for you." Sonia's resilience amazed me. Over the following weeks, she adjusted to the new reality with a grace that I hadn't expected. Diane was granted visitation rights, but I ensured they were supervised at first. Sonia needed stability, and I wasn't going to let Diane disrupt that. Meanwhile, Diane's affair with Jeremy unraveled in spectacular fashion. Word spread quickly in her professional circle, and Jeremy's wife, yes, he was married too, found out about their relationship. She wasn't nearly as forgiving as Diane had hoped. Jeremy's wife filed for divorce and made sure his name was mud in their industry. Soon, Jeremy's once promising career was in shambles. Diane, for her part, was facing her own reckoning. The affair, now public knowledge, had alienated her from many of her friends and colleagues. She tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming I had been neglectful and cold. But the evidence I'd collected told a different story. Even her closest friends began to distance themselves. One evening, Diane showed up at the house unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, tears streaming down her face. She looked disheveled, her usual composure replaced with desperation. "James, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I've lost everything. Jeremy's gone, my job is in jeopardy, and Sonia barely wants to talk to me. I can't do this alone." I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my expression neutral. "What exactly are you asking for, Diane?" "Help," she said simply. "A second chance. I'll do anything to fix this. Please, just let me come home." I stared at her for a long moment, weighing my words carefully. "You didn't lose everything, Diane. You threw it away. You made the choice to lie, to cheat, to betray me and this family. You don't get to come back and pretend like none of it happened." Her sobs grew louder, but I stood firm. "You're not the victim here, Diane. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it." I closed the door, shutting out her cries. It wasn't easy, despite everything, part of me still felt the weight of 12 years together. But I knew this was the only way forward. Diane had shown me who she truly was, and there was no going back. The next day, I received a call from Angela. The divorce was nearly finalized, and I would retain the house and primary custody of Sonia. It was a victory, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like survival. I had protected what mattered most, my daughter, my home, and my dignity. As I sat in the quiet house that evening, I realized something: this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would rebuild my life on my own terms. And I wouldn't let Diane, or anyone else, tear it down again. Life after Diane's betrayal was not easy, but I had found a rhythm, a fragile balance between work, raising Sonia, and moving forward. The house was quieter now, lonelier in the evenings, but I told myself this was the price of peace. Sonia was adjusting well, or so I thought. Her laughter came a little easier, her conversations less hesitant. I was proud of her resilience, even as I struggled to fully regain mine. The divorce finalized quickly, and Diane's pleas for reconciliation eventually faded. I saw her only during her visitation with Sonia, which remained tense but civil. For a while, it seemed like life was stabilizing. But the calm would not last. It was a Friday afternoon when the first cracks appeared. Sonia had stayed home from school, complaining of a stomachache. I'd taken the day off to care for her, but she spent most of the time in her room, quiet and withdrawn. I chalked it up to teenage mood swings, a natural response to everything she had been through. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a crash from upstairs. My heart raced as I bolted up the stairs, calling her name. When I reached her room, the sight stopped me cold. Sonia was on the floor, unconscious, her skin pale and clammy. A bottle of pills lay spilled beside her, the contents scattered across the carpet. My hands trembled as I knelt beside her, shaking her gently. "Sonia! Wake up! Please, wake up!" Her breathing was shallow, her pulse faint. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. The operator's voice was calm, methodical, but I could barely focus on the instructions. All I could think about was my daughter, my bright, beautiful girl, lying there, lifeless. The paramedics arrived quickly, taking over as I stood frozen in the hallway. One of them asked me questions, but my answers were fragmented, my mind reeling. They rushed Sonia to the hospital, and I followed in a daze, the drive a blur of flashing lights and suffocating fear. At the hospital, I was ushered into a waiting room while the doctors worked. The minutes stretched into hours, each second heavier than the last. Finally, a doctor approached, his face grave. "She's stable," he said, and I felt a rush of relief so intense I nearly collapsed. "But she's not out of the woods yet. We've pumped her stomach and administered treatment for the overdose, but it will take time to assess the long-term effects." I nodded, barely processing his words. All that mattered was that she was alive. When I was allowed to see her, the sight of her in the hospital bed shattered me. Her small frame seemed even smaller under the stark white sheets, her face pale and expressionless. I sat beside her, taking her hand in mine. "Sonia," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Why? Why didn't you tell me you were hurting?" Her eyelids fluttered, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. I didn't know how to handle everything. Mom, the divorce, everything changing. I felt so alone." Her words cut deeper than any wound. I had been so focused on protecting her, on keeping her life stable, that I hadn't seen the pain she was carrying. I had failed her in the worst way. Over the next few days, I stayed by her side, refusing to leave the hospital. Diane showed up once, her face stricken with guilt and fear. She tried to approach Sonia's bed, but Sonia turned away, her body tense. "Maybe it's better if you leave," I told Diane quietly. "She needs space right now." Diane nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Please, just tell her I love her, she said before leaving. When Sonia was finally discharged, I vowed to be better. I arranged for therapy sessions and made a point to talk to her every day, asking how she was feeling, what she needed. Slowly, she began to open up. The weight she carried didn't disappear overnight, but there were glimpses of the girl I knew, the girl I loved more than anything. Then, one evening, everything came crashing down again. I was working in my office when I heard a scream from Sonia's room. I ran upstairs, my heart pounding. She was standing by the window, her face pale with terror. "What's wrong?" I asked, rushing to her side. She pointed outside, her hands trembling. "It's Mom," she whispered. I looked out the window and saw Diane's car parked in the driveway. She was sitting in the driver's seat, unmoving. Something felt off, a sense of foreboding that made my stomach churn. I ran outside, calling her name, but she didn't respond. When I opened the car door, the scene inside froze me. Diane was slumped over the steering wheel, a bottle of pills and an empty wine bottle on the passenger seat. Her face was pale, her lips blue. "No," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Diane, wake up." But she didn't wake up. She was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief and guilt. Sonia blamed herself, convinced that her overdose had driven Diane to this. I tried to comfort her, but my own guilt mirrored hers. I had pushed Diane away, shut her out when she begged for help. Could I have prevented this? Could I have saved her? In the end, the tragedy of it all was too much to bear. I lost my wife to betrayal, my daughter to despair, and myself to the overwhelming weight of what could have been. Life went on, but it was forever marked by the scars of choices, mistakes, and loss.